Nice.
Good afternoon, everyone out there. Listen, we are here for another weekly Stand Down Live. I'm excited for this week's guest in our conversation. But one of the reasons why we started Stand Down, 3 months ago, was really to, have conversation amid the global and local, and I would just say national unrest for justice and liberation. After the untimely death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and really wanting to speak first at that moment was against the stand or against the orders and deployment of National Guard and military to the state of Minnesota, particularly in the city of Minneapolis. And just as VFP, Veterans for Peace, we really wanted to stand in the gap in terms of our veterans who were thinking of how can they stand in the gap, and then also representing those that are on active duty who started reaching out to some of our membership about not taking orders, around questioning their orders and not feeling comfortable taking arms against their neighbors. Thus the name Stand Down. And many of us who co-host this come from a myriad of different examples. I should say examples, experiences in military. Myself personally, um, Natasha. I'm in Chicago. I'm a veteran of the Air Force. I joined after high school in '96 and retired after 20 years in 2016. And I talk about this journey of unpacking my military experience, and having this veteran community is helpful for those of us who sometimes just have these conversations in silos. And then those of us who are interested in also standing up for those that we know on active duty can't have these conversations openly. So this has been a place where we've seen active duty folks who have not only reached out and watched this show, but have also joined Veterans for Peace. So, that's really why we do this. It's for veteran community to have a place to go and talk and communicate. And then also for those that are on active duty to give advice, to let them know that they're not alone. And so that's really why I'm excited about we, continue to do this. And I think we get better every week. So this week, our guest is Adrienne Kinne, who's the president of Veterans for Peace, who is, really, someone who, just in speaking with, you over, a course of weeks and just listening to your vision for VFP, I'm just really excited for you to be our guest today. One of the things, just before we get into conversation, is, well, yeah, if you want to briefly introduce, and then we can kind of go forward in our conversation. Is that okay with you, Adrienne?
Yeah, perfect. So my name is Adrienne Kinne. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I too joined the military right after high school. I actually joined the delayed entry program during my senior year of high school, mostly because I had no idea how to pay for college and my parents weren't really in a position to help. And I got a call from a recruiter one day. So I turned 18 in basic training and served active duty for 4 years as an Arabic linguist. The language school out in Monterey, California was absolutely wonderful. It was like a life-changing experience. I mean, learning Arabic, the course is about 1.5 years long. All of our instructors were native speakers from all over the Middle East. We learned so much about the history and the culture. And yeah, it was a really good experience. After 4 years, I and a lot of people who were linguists, we most people that I knew did not re-enlist because we didn't really feel like the military actually gave a crap about us, which is a whole other conversation. But I ended up joining the reserves because I thought maybe I would give the reserves a chance, see what that was like. As a result, I was in the reserves on 9/11. I was activated for a year. That resulted in me being stop lost. I volunteered for a second year since I was stop lost and got out in 2004. And, it's really interesting because I just a month ago moved back to upstate New York after living abroad for the last 2 years. And I have not lived in New York since I left for the military. And it's kind of been trippy, just to be back and be where I grew up and like just the life that has happened in between now and then. Um, it's also interesting thinking about, me back when I was 17, 18 years old. And honestly, it wasn't until, because I was always in the military, I was always the youngest person in my unit, sometimes by a decade or more. And I don't know, it was only as I got older that I realized, how inappropriate guys were that I served with, who were in senior positions, squad leaders, or what have you, because at the time it seemed normal. But when I got to be 30, 35, 40 years old, I was like, holy crap, I would never act that way towards a 17-year-old kid. Um, it's interesting. I'm very excited to get into organizing back in the States and in New York. And this is just it's sad and it's frustrating, but it's also an exciting time where I feel like people are waking up and wanting to get involved. And that there's a real moment of possible change, which you can't just hope for change to happen. You have to work to make it happen. But without that hope that things could be better, what are we all doing here? So I certainly hope and feel that we as people have a long way to go and learn how to be better. And that's even true in Veterans for Peace. We're doing a lot of work at the moment to try to improve the internal health of our organization, make sure that we're all treating each other respectfully and thoughtfully, and really thinking about, our own racism and sexism and otherism and everything that we carry with us that we might not really be aware of, but that we need to be able to address and examine and self-reflect. And, life is about learning. So I think, we can all say that none of us are perfect and we all have opportunity to learn and do better. And that's true of Veterans for Peace as well as anything else out there in the world. So that is my hopefully not too long intro.
No, that was great. And I want to just kind of go back just a little bit and also cover your bio. And then I think just kind of branch off in the conversation. I'm hoping that we can get a little bit more into what did you mean about some of that treatment that you experienced when you were a younger person, a younger soldier, because in this current climate we're seeing, just as thinking about Fort Hood and all of what is kind of happening there. It's a culture that dates back to our time when we both joined in the '90s. So I want to get into that. But listen, you come with so much experience. And for those that are not already aware of you and who you are, I know you've been active in the peace movement since 2007. First with Iraq Veterans Against the War, currently VFP president in the U.S. You served in the U.S. Army from 94 to 2004. Again, as you said, as an Arabic linguist, enlisting after in senior year. Same here. You have an educational background in psychology and social work with over 10 years experience in a variety of positions within the VA. What a
Yeah.
unique story. Since connecting with the Veteran Peace Movement, you've worked with organizations at the local, state, as well as national and international level. Recently moved back to the States. So it's, good to have you on this side of the pond. And through, I think, the multiple youth that you have, I think that we always felt connected, but just having you on this side of the pond just feels really great. So for you and your family who are back home, welcome back.
Thank
And
you.
so I want to go into a little bit about your experience, like what, it's not typical for a soldier, right, to go from, you were still, fresh out of the Army when you matriculated to the peace movement. I'm curious to hear what brought you from the Army to peace.
Yeah. I, like I said, I joined out of high school. I was still a kid when I enlisted in the military, and I had a sense of myself, but I was still pretty, malleable in terms of, you get a phone call and somebody says, "Oh, you join the military, we'll pay for you to go to college." I'm like, "Sign me up." So, I don't know. The first 4 years in the military, I felt like it was pretty normal. And like I said, there were things that happened that I didn't even really realize were screwed up until decades later, to be honest. But
Mhm.
and maybe that's a bit why I didn't reenlist active duty and why I switched to the reserves. But to be honest, after 9/11, I remember that day really well, and I so hoped that it would be a wake up call to the United States, because I thought surely if there are people out there who are so angry with us, not even knowing any of the backstory and the who did what or what have you, but if there were people out there who are so angry that they would do something like that, I was like, surely there's got to be something we are doing wrong in the world. And I hoped that we would respond in a way that would help the world move forward in a positive direction. And it's not possible to do that using the military and waging war. War just doesn't work that way. You can't beat somebody into loving you. I mean, that's true in a interpersonal way. It's true in an international way. Um, but So I don't know. The 2 years that I was activated, I was doing the same job. I was a voice interceptor. I was listening to radio and then later satellite phone communications. And even our mission, it seemed to be different. Before 9/11, we were listening to Middle Eastern militaries. After 9/11, we were listening to any and all manners of phone calls to include, journalists, aid organizations. I remember once hearing an American speaking to a British aid worker on a phone call. And the British guy said, be careful what you say because the Americans are listening to you. And the American said, well, they can't listen to me. I'm an American. And I brought this phone conversation to the attention of my officer in charge because I was like, in the past, we would have deleted stuff like that. And we would have made note of, this is something not to listen to, this channel or this whatever, because we're not supposed to listen to our own citizens or allies. And he was so mad. He felt like the American was betraying national secrets to the enemy. And it was like an aid worker talking to a British aid worker saying that he has the right not to be spied on by his own country. but the response was quite the opposite of what I would have thought would have been the response. So the invasion of Iraq too. I mean, I just remember thinking that the whole backstory to, weapons of mass destruction, and it was all, bullshit. I mean, it looked bullshit, just on the face of it. And so, I made the decision not to stay in. And then 2003, 2004, 2005, we started hearing more and more about torture and extraordinary rendition, Abu Ghraib, and the treatment of prisoners. And like with each story, I got more angry, and I I was like, somebody surely is going to do something. There's going to be intervention. Congress is going to do their job and intervene. Um, the president did so many things that should have been impeachable. I mean, both Bush and Cheney. It's just uh, the human rights crimes and deaths that happened as a result of their leadership and decision making. And it didn't happen. Each year it got a bit worse, and then nobody in government stood up, or very few people did. And then in 2006, there was a huge. People viewed the referendum, the congressional election in 2006, as a referendum on Iraq, and Congress, the Democrats got control of both the White House, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and that was in November. Towards the end of the year, Bush announces an escalation in Iraq. Congress went along with it, and that was when I was like, I am done with this, waiting for elected officials to do something, because they're not going to, and join the peace movement. And I would say it's been a very life-affirming experience.
That's real. Yeah, clearly I was still on active duty during that time, but it was some things that you said that stuck out. Like despite having re-enlisted so many times to get to 20, I remember there was always this nag or this pull to get out of the military. But I remember holding on to the adults, the elected adults who were in Washington. And I remember every step along the way thinking, they know, they're on to what we're doing, right? Like, no way is this going to fly. The American people are starting to ask questions. Brave veterans, were starting to speak out, and things were beginning to leak. And I remember, it's actually what changed me politically as well, right? Because I was on active duty. I was participating in something that was, just at times just unconscionable. And I think I've heard you say in one of your talks before, is it's, not just the people that are outside the wire that struggle in ways in what they participated in. So I hear you saying, you were stateside, but very much engaged in global operations that, may have brought you some moral injury. And I remember at the time not knowing what to do with that. Because again, I believe in my units, it's, when you're on active duty, you're kind of stuck in this patriotism or cycle of what you would think that's like. You go to the unit calls, it's, it's the raw, you're getting it. Everyone is in this cycle of following orders. Right. And I remember at a time, came in under Clinton, was there for the 8 years under Bush. And then, the later years, my last 8 years were under Obama. And I mean, there wasn't a time, that entire time, I should say, that it escalated to, things were just far outside of what you would think the regulations, the rules, things that we previously, followed a rule book and Air Force instructions and regulations. And I remember the years when that went away. And no matter what we needed to buy, we had money for it. And no matter, the types of approval that we needed to do previous things, we no longer needed that approval. And things quickly escalated out of control. So I'm curious when for some people who bring these things up to their unit and start asking questions, you become really otherized really
Mhm.
quickly, right? For some people that, you had, I'm sure, a top secret clearance. For some, it's suspending your clearance for a number of days, months, or what have you. I'm curious, did you experience any type of retribution or reprisal, while you were on active duty when you were starting to ask questions?
Yeah, for sure. And it was particularly the last year. Um, I I really didn't want to have anything to do with any of the ultra patriotic, getting all gung ho about shock and awe. That was a phrase that used to turn my stomach. And there were guys in my unit that were just so pumped about it. Um, our officer in charge would get emailed these videos of bomb strikes and invite people to gather around the computer to watch it. And I was disgusted. Um, and as a result, it was primarily, I mean, I started to withdraw from engaging with the reservists I was activated with. There were about 18 to 20 of us. The first year, we were pretty tight. The second year, I feel like I was kind of backing away from folks, but um, primarily it was my officer in charge, Mr. Barry, who just tried to make my life hell. And I was just really fortunate that nobody respected him in our chain of command. And so whatever he tried to do, he wanted to get me an Article 15 and demoted and the whole 9 yards for I don't even remember now what it was, um but the command senior leadership wouldn't let it fly. So I remember actually when we demobilized, we were in formation, and I was like, man, I know these past 2 years have been really hard, but I'm really glad that we were all able to get through it together. I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I guess, your brain tries to make sense of experiences and let go of stuff. Um, and that was my way of doing that. But
Yeah, that's real. And I asked that question because I'm curious. A lot of folks, particularly towards the end of their career, their enlistment, go through that. I've shared this openly before. That was my experience in my 18th year. Really around the 16th year, I started, asking a lot of questions because I got closer to the truth. My last assignment was at the Air Force Special Operations Command. Um, and it was the command, and it was the assignment where the things I saw on the news contradicted everything that we were doing in real time. And I sat in those commander update briefs while we talked, or while it was talked about the narrative that would be shared, right? Which, to anyone who was ignorant up until that point, what we were participating in wasn't legit. And it's quite honestly because we helped prepare the media statements, and how to brief the American people. So in real time, seeing what was happening, I just, started to detach in a way from my peers. And again, because while I did sit in those rooms, like you said, sometimes it wasn't an option. But I remember just watching the reaction of people, like the men, predominantly men. AFSOC was overwhelmingly men, male and white men, right? Very racist organization. I would say with extremist folks who were in our unit. But one of the things that really stuck out was in my 18th year, it became, this thing where it was like a target on my back. And as I went to like the local law department to try to get some support, I realized that there were so many others, many of whom were starting to detach away from the mission, whether, just didn't want to participate, were, trying to get mental health support, so that, then their units started to come after them. And so, one of the things that I'm thinking about in this moment is for people who might be on active duty, who are thinking about, asking questions and have someone to talk to. So I'm curious, did you have strong support while you were in? Did you have external, did you have family, friends that weren't in your unit or in the military that you were able to confide in? And I say that because for me, that was really helpful, was to have friends who had retired or friends who were not in the military and just have outlets. So I'm asking if you had that, and then just
Yeah.
think what that looked like.
It was interesting because I had a top secret security clearance. My job was classified. We weren't supposed to share anything about what we did. People could know I was an Arabic linguist, or they could know I was a voice interceptor, or they could know I was, stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia. But you weren't supposed to put all those things together in a conversation with somebody. And I took that really seriously. So my family didn't know what I did in the military until 2008, when after like a year of being in the peace movement, I was like, screw all this like crap. I'm just going to start talking about my experiences, because otherwise I'm not going to let some corrupt system tell me what I can and can't talk about, or even just what I did for nearly 10 years of my life. But I didn't really talk about it with my family. A lot of my family members could be pretty, not conservative, but mainstream, I guess is a good way of putting it. They're not going to rock the boat. They'd vote for a president during wartime, because you don't change leadership mid war. There were, fortunately, a number of Arabic linguists who, I would say that they're probably, us talking together was a bigger piece of the support, because a lot of people had questions about what we were doing. And like I said, a lot of people that I had kind of gone through the language school and then served with those 2 years on active duty, the first go round, most people didn't stay in because they didn't really trust the military or feel like the military had their back. So I will say one thing that happened, which was really awesome, and I'm not one to really like Facebook or online stuff, but after I started speaking out publicly in Iraq Veterans Against the War, I got messages from a half dozen people I served on active duty with in 96 to 98, and then 2000 even, in the reserves. And they were all really supportive, which helped me tremendously feel like I was, number one, not completely psycho deranged, or two, not completely, going against everything that I had served for. I mean, honestly, I feel like the work in Veterans for Peace is more in keeping with the ideals that I thought my military service would be conducted in than it was. Like, you join the military thinking you'll do good, but it took becoming a peace activism to actually do good. And yeah.
That's such a good point. Good that you had support, and I would just say for folks out there that are thinking about, putting that target on your back. Sometimes it's just asking questions. Is to, find a social circle of people that you trust, who you can talk to. Sometimes outside your unit, someone that's in a completely different unit, and at least just have someone that you can talk to, if not get other supports. When you talked about having friends, yeah, I haven't gotten there yet because a lot of my friends are still stuck in the bubble. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
And for those, there are folks who, believe, um, you've got this pension, you've had 20 years. Clearly it wasn't, bad for you. And it's like, no, that's not the truth. And so a
Right.
lot of friends, they either don't understand what it was like. It was hell for a lot of those years. Particularly when you talked about the buildup in Iraq. I was in Turkey at the time in a contingency unit, as close as could be. And those were things that I think about today. Sometimes when I'm thinking about like what brings me, because I want to try to get over the things that I'm feeling. So when I try to share that with friends who were also there in Turkey with me at the time, or who had been, on a deployment, and to know that they're, not there. And sometimes they question if I'm anti-military, and I'm like, no, I'm not anti-military personnel. I'm going to always have, my friends back, and those that are, in boots, many of whom are poor folks who joined because of the economy. But it has felt, a bit refreshing to be in the Veterans for Peace, which is the first organization, that I found, I think, like 2 years after I retired. So it's been the only place that I can talk, have these conversations with veterans who get it. Like I almost don't have to explain it enough. I think you and I could probably sit here for an hour and just nod our head at each other because we get it.
Yeah.
But and just to follow that point and kind of land, is for those that are listening that might not be there. Again, it was really my first shock, was what am I participating in while on active duty, and then when I retired, a whole bunch of stuff came up for me that I didn't even know was there. And then I started this, process of what I call unpacking that experience. And it's been 4 years and I'm still unpacking that experience. Some of the Vietnam era veterans are like, you might be unpacking that for the rest of your life,
Right.
quite honestly. So, mental stamina is something that I think is really important, and having that support circle. So I want
Yeah.
to, you have anything that you want to share there before we?
Yeah, just hearing some of what you were saying. I mean, for the last 5 years in the VA, I was a readjustment counselor at the vet center in Vermont, and the number of veterans, Vietnam vets, because a lot of them are retiring or have been retiring over the past 5, 10, 15 years. But it's like, when you're working and you're go, go, go all the time, especially in the military, there's no time to think about, like really deeply think about the crap and the muck and the gut and the gunk, is when you retire, or take a step back, that all of a sudden you have this free time and free space to think about things more deeply. And I mean, there were a lot of things that happened in the military that I didn't think about for years. And, it makes me wonder, there's some method to the madness in the military, right? Where it's, if you have a free second, they'll have you outside picking up rocks and painting them or something, or picking up pine cones and sticks and then putting them back strategically in the outside, just so it's clean, but it looks like it's still the outside. It's like they fill every second with something just to keep you so busy that you have no time to think about anything. Um, and then the other thing is that I've definitely been to counseling more than once. The first time was in 2007, 2008, when I was really just starting to unpack things for the first time. And it was really overwhelming, like completely. I thought I was going insane. Like I was really thought I was legit going crazy. There were times when I'd be driving the car and I would just like have almost like an out of body experience, because I would just get so far in my head that I don't know, it's like I checked out for a second. And I don't know, there was just so much that I had taken for granted, thinking I knew what was what, and found out that quite the opposite was true, in a bad way. And vet centers, the VA, there are people out there who are decent, and they want to help. And vet centers in particular, I mean, I served 10 years in the military and then worked in the VA for, I don't know, 5, 6 years before I even knew that vet centers existed. And that vet centers, it's part of the VA, but it's separate. And it's a counseling, mental health, activity. There's so many things that they offer, but you don't have to have a honorable discharge. You can have any discharge. You don't have to be enrolled in the VA to go to a vet center. You just have to bring in your DD 214. They see combat veterans and any veteran who has experienced military sexual trauma, and it can be a good resource to keep in mind. I know they also see active duty people too.
See, that's something that would have would have been good. I remember, I think it was somewhere in my 18th or 19th year when, I had to essentially make up other medical appointments when I was actually going to, talk to mental health, because in ASTOC, quite honestly, that was frowned upon, right? There was, the culture of your week. And again, some of the things that I was, dealing with was the reality of, you know, what I was dealing with every day, not to mention being in a unit with extreme, um, I don't know, extremists. These are guys who used to read the Drudge Report, watch Fox News all day long, listen to Alex Jones, and had an alternative understanding of everything. So, being the only Black woman in that space, it was not just the duty, but it was just my body. Everything felt, combative in that assignment. And so, and when you're trying to reach out for help, I wish I would have known that the vet centers were available for active duty, because it may have been a safer place. So that's good to know for those that and on active duty. And I'll actually spread that around, because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is there
They'll see people in the reserves and National Guard, and their system is separate from the VA's record keeping system, which means that because the military, a lot of them units will have shared information between the VA and their units to keep medical records, streamlined. But the vet centers, it's separate, and they do that specifically so that people can have some faith, knowing that their units won't find out about their counseling unless they sign a form and says, I want my records released to this person for this reason. Otherwise, it's, they don't share anything with anybody unless there's like a life-threatening emergency.
Right. That's good to know. Again, because sometimes they do, share your information. Commanders speak to commanders, and we'll say, "Hey, we got someone over here that's talking about this," and before you know it, it is back at the unit. But I think overwhelmingly, the military has a black eye in terms of mental health over the last couple of years, so they are trying to do better within the services, if you will. So I
Yeah.
want to transition a little bit in terms of you talked about just being a woman, and then you briefly spoke about military sexual trauma in terms of just the culture of what you may have seen in in the army, and primarily asking this question because of what we see happening at Fort Hood. A lot of our civilian neighbors are baffled by it, and I'm almost shocked that I'm not, right? And I'm not shocked, but I'm just not, and it's because no matter where. from basic training down at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio to the very first or to the very last assignment in Florida. Rape culture was something that was consistent. It was known by commands who turned the other, who turned a blind eye to that or just did not give it the proper attention, which sent the wrong message, right? Was that we take care of our own. And as sometimes as a woman, you kind of, and the men who experience, just the rape culture, because military sexual trauma is something that happens, but I think the rape culture is what is creates this system of taking care of the bad actors and not telling the truth in reporting and demonizing the victim or the person who reports. So I'm kind of curious because of this moment and what we see happening at Fort Hood, where I think it's over 20 soldiers have been, missing or murdered in the last 9 to 10 months, which is baffling at one Army post. So I'm curious, like when you talk about your experience as a woman in the military, what are some of the things that you saw? And then maybe did you see some of that when you were working for the VA as well?
Yeah. I learned pretty quickly in the military not to say anything to anybody about anything, because I remember people in my unit, like the enlisted folks, hanging out in the day room in our barracks talking about, this woman made an accusation against this senior, enlisted official. And the way they would speak about her, the women included, they would be like, oh, she's just some, skank out to ruin some guy's career. And it was just, totally unsympathetic, blaming the victim, saying they're making things up or lying. And if, that wasn't even chain of command, that was fellow soldiers talking about something they probably didn't even know anything about. But it certainly, you didn't want to be the person that people were talking about like that. And I don't know. The military isn't a safe space for people to open up and share experiences like that. And it's nothing, honestly, nothing shocks me anymore either, because I remember even when I was a kid in high school hearing about, what was it, Tailhook? Where it was the naval officers at some training something. I don't know. There was this big, huge scandal that went public about the way they were treating women or bringing in hookers or something. I don't remember it, but I remember it kind of being a thing that was like a blip that people were talking about, the way the military treated women for a half a second, and then it goes away. And then you're like, oh, well, then it must be okay. And it seems like that happens periodically. There'll be some story, but then people don't want to believe that that is how the military really is. So then they pretend that that one incident is like packaged and resolved, and the rest of the military is just a-okay. And from everything that I have experienced in the military and counseling veterans, I mean, golly, even the stories of women who have served in the 80s, early 90s, it's mind-boggling that this stuff still is just going on. And of course it's going to go on because the military refuses to allow any outside intervention. And the military is a system where they routinely pit soldiers against each other to get them up to not only dehumanize each other, but they do that so that they can dehumanize the enemy. And I don't know, that's just a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for people to just treat each other deplorably. And you see that so many ways. hazing, bullying, rape culture, the whole nine yards. It's yeah, it's pretty bad, and it's just not a safe environment for people to step forward. I know they've done a lot to try and correct that over the recent years, but honestly, it's like I don't know, it's window dressing. It's like pretending to make change when nothing is changing. People are still concerned about coming forward, saying anything, sharing anything. Um, it's still the military, investigating itself. It's still people who come forward who are treated as if they are the ones who did something wrong. It's a broken system that, and if anything, because people think that too, right? That, oh, you must be against soldiers. I'm like, no, I am pro soldiers because they're regular people who joined for probably similar reasons that I did, thinking they were either going to do something good or like get themselves out of a situation or have a better lot in life. And they're just cast into this system that just chews them up and spits them out. And, it's no wonder so many vets are angry. Like, I saw so many veterans who are just angry about everything, but they didn't really know what they were angry about. And so it just comes out and it gets directed in all sorts of different directions. Yeah. I mean, talk about, PR campaigning and canning stories. That's something that the military and the government did really well during the first Gulf War. And I didn't learn about that until years later when I was going back to school. But all the stories they did, trying to say you got to support the troops, support the war, to undo the anti-war sentiment of the Vietnam War era. It a very strategic media campaign, and people buy into it.
We see that. I mean, and now look what it is. I mean, it's almost unstoppable. In terms of the propaganda, you know, reaching young people as young as middle school. I think a lot of times with JROTC, here in Chicago, which is one of the most militarized school districts, we see young people walking around in battle dress uniform, waiting at the city bus stop, going to school. So the priming and really grooming of our civilian sector to tie the ribbon around the tree and the thank you for your service and the flyovers at the football game, all of that propaganda, the video gaming. We see a lot of here recently where a lot of recruiters are using video games as a segue to recruitment. And so, I think it's definitely strategic. Many of the things that I know today, look, I read, there were commanders read lists, as senior NCOs, we would have to, read the commander's reading list. And I mean, you're right when you say fill your mind up with things, because I was, reading into that. But now, knowing what I know now, the brave folks who, were telling their stories over the years, I just didn't see that or read about that until now. So I find myself upset, like, damn, I wish I would have known this. I may have made different decisions instead of, continued enlistments. And quite specifically, I'm thinking about, when I talk about racism, it's not new. It's not something new that, just started happening. This is something that has quite honestly been a stain on the military for as long as Black troops have been in the military. Some of the things that you hear about publicly or more historically, but then the lesser known things that may made sense to me, like, okay, so this is also a system, just like the rape culture, right? And how you pit people against one another, and how, at times when you start asking, you know, I'm thinking broadly. I can be very specific, but I don't want it to be just about my experiences. But I'm just thinking about when you begin to start questioning those things, how you really start to, when you read more, you really start to understand the things that you were questioning, right?
Right.
You were questioning it because it wasn't right, it didn't feel right, and then you start learning the truth, and then you get, I don't know, you get mad, but then there's a little bit of liberation in that truth.
For
So I was,
sure.
mhm. You froze for a moment. Did you have another thought?
Oh, sorry. No, 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 no. I'm listening. I'm listening because I'm just, yeah, soaking in. I completely agree. The more you learn, the more deeply you can explore. And no, it's something you were saying. When I was going to school for my undergrad, I took a lot of history courses just because I absolutely love learning history. And so much so that I double majored in it with psychology. And I had to do a thesis. And I'd always been intrigued by um, the treatment of Black soldiers in the US Army, especially knowing that, the troops were segregated until, really recently in the grand scheme of things. And I had this book when I was little that was talking about life as a Black soldier in the regimental army, or something like that. I think I actually still have it somewhere on my bookshelf. But the the treatment of Black soldiers in the South, in particular, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it's like crazy, insane. People being lynched for wearing their uniform, Black soldiers being lynched for wearing their uniform off post. There was one camp in the South where, Black soldiers couldn't go into white soldiers' areas, right? And so there was one camp where um, the Black soldiers area was completely surrounded by the living areas of white soldiers, and they had to cross through. And anytime people did, there was just huge, like the racist attacks and harassment, and the times that it escalated to something really far more heinous in terms of the way soldiers were treating each other, on the basis of the color of their skin, but also because the military was in the entire U.S. Government and way of life you know was training people that some people are just lesser people than other people. And at the same time, I know that's partially a way of conquering and dividing working class people, right? You get working class people pitted against each other based on color of skin or gender or religion, or any of a host of things that kind of describe people. And it just it keeps us all um, fighting with each other instead of addressing the system that needs to be as at the root of the problems in this country.
There's really, yeah, when I think of the infiltration that we've heard about for years of white supremacists, KKK, now extremists who have been, recruited. So when you think about the 40s to the 60s, I've heard about how even into the 70s and 80s, you still had, residue of that mentality. And then in the 90s, we start to hear, little lesser known, but in the 90s, a big insurgence of enlistment of folks, and not just on the enlisted side, but of folks who had extreme ideas. We also hear that in the police departments.
Yeah.
Some of that is coming to light now, where there are actually like subunits in the police department that, once they kill, they get a tattoo, or, they bend their star. So those types of things you still had happening in the military. And I think still continues. There's an element of that today, because again, up until 2016, I kind of saw that in Florida. So, a lot of times, um, the, what would you call that? The tolerance of racism in the military, the rape culture in the military, the sexism that happens in the military, how all of that also impacts veterans' mental health. And like we were just sharing, there's some stuff that doesn't come up for you until you retire. Again, some of the things that I myself had experienced, again, didn't come up for me until a year or two after I had taken off, the uniform. So there was some. This is a really good conversation. You're bringing up stuff for me that I think is good, but for those who are, listening, again, I think it's important to have a peer support circle to talk through some of these things. Listen, September is Suicide Awareness and Prevention Month. Seeing a lot of stories being shared. We also know that there's an element of veterans and also active duty who are unable to handle things that they're, again, and maybe because whatever they're handling in isolation. So I think this is really a moment for us to, and it was good to hear from you, the VA, but it's a really good moment for us to let folks know, like, Veterans for Peace is really committed to be there for folks. We have a large network of peer organizations that we can connect folks to. We created what you would call a peer support email, where folks can email stand down at veteransforpeace.org. And this is where, depending on your branch, we have a representative of Marines, Air Force, Army, Navy, from Vietnam era to post 9/11, who, if nothing else, would, exchange emails or have a phone call just to stand in the gap for folks. Many times, like I said, creating that social circle, mental stamina, taking care of yourself, self-care, is really important in this moment while we're thinking about all of the things that our troops and veterans are going through. One other point that I really want to flag is when we talk about organizations, we started Stand Down. Our very first guest was from the GI Rights Hotline, who was really telling us about the spike in calls that they're receiving from active duty. So that's how we really first heard. And then we had a young soldier who reached out to one of our veterans for some support and a plan, as he planned to not take orders a couple of months back. And so, yeah, GI Rights Hotline, they're, lawyers, they have counselors, they've studied the Air Force, Army, Marine, Navy regulations and instructions. So they're able to help folks and kind of guide them in a way to be supportive and help them understand what their rights are in this moment. And so, there were some questions in the chat that I thought we could spend our last few minutes kind of going over. One that that piques my interest as well is someone that said, how has your Intel background impacted you as a person? Do you have some thoughts to share?
It's not like it is in the movies. It's not so acutely glamorous and like omniscient as it seems watching like The Bourne Identity or something. I was sitting in a cubicle, like listening to radios. It was a bit surreal to be able to tune antenna that were, halfway around the world. But, it's definitely, it was very bizarre listening to people. And it was really weird to not be able to talk about what I did. And it was really, I don't know. Golly, I've never really thought of that specifically before. I'm going to have to think about this because I'm sure it did. when I was going to join the military, I really either wanted to be a pilot or work in the healthcare industry. And that was my recruiter who kind of geared me, found out I had, you know, a number of years of French, and had me take a language aptitude test, which was a really bizarre experience because it's this made up language that you have no idea what you're doing for the whole test. But apparently I did well on it. So I don't know. That's how I ended up being an Arabic linguist. I thought I was going to be a French linguist, touring the embassies of the world. That's what my recruiter told me. But as it turns out, I was a Arabic linguist sitting in a cubicle somewhere, listening. And yeah, I don't know. I would definitely have to think about that some.
Yeah, and it looks like, I'm hearing the comments that someone had the same job in the Marines, in Desert Storm, and is basically sharing that experience impacts him to this day. So,
Yeah.
just curious if there was something that you had there. Someone is also mentioning that many of us feel alone. I know one of the thoughts, COVID-19. So for those many of us who at least had, a meeting to get out to and could be social in other ways. How do you and your husband feel less alone? What are some of the things that you all do to create? Well, you have someone at home. But I'm also thinking about veterans who, just have a unique experience, and have many different on ramps to like embracing out everything that's happening. So I'm thinking about how do you, how does Adrienne take care of herself? How do you, handle some of your thoughts that you have in processing that? And then just the last point is, how do you feel less isolated in this moment?
Yeah. We've gone through a major life transition moving back to the States in the middle of the pandemic, and it was largely because of COVID. Like life in London, which was not able to proceed as we had planned. My husband's daughters ended up moving back to Croatia. We didn't. I mean, I didn't leave the house in London except for to go to the grocery store for months, and it was really difficult. So one thing we did in the UK was our Veterans for Peace group there started like weekly Zoom calls just so we can interact with one another, which, it doesn't replace like interacting with people in life. But we're really fortunate now to be back in upstate New York. It's, everybody is being mindful. People wear masks when they go out, but rates are low enough that you can interact with family. You have to do it like responsibly, but it is possible. So we're really lucky where we are. We have a yard where we could go out. We thought about that a lot in London too, because we had a yard we could go out and there are so many people in, uh, apartment blocks that, had a small 1-2 bedroom apartment, studio apartment. They had no outdoors to go to. And it's kind of interesting because I think people are kind of learning how to re-engage with the outdoors. And I love hiking. In fact, hiking, being outside, it's been my grounding thing for years now. And it's kind of nice to see people kind of engaging with the outdoors again. It's also frustrating because I try to go to a hike and the parking lot is full, and I'm like, oh well, golly, this is already saturated, so I'm gonna turn around and go back home because I don't want to add to the crisis, but or potentially, But yeah, we got a dog who is just really awesome. So I have a dog and a cat now. The animals are really fantastic. It's interesting because a friend of mine who's a veterinarian, she's like, so many people are adopting dogs now, but they never, like, they're not going out as much. So like the dogs are getting really attached and don't do well when they're left home alone, which is definitely an issue with our dog. He does not like being left home alone, but he's learning. He's learning how to. So animals outdoors, staying active, keeping in touch with people, knowing you're not crazy just because you think everything is screwed up.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so important. Yeah, that's some of what we do here. So for chapters that are chapters that are across the nation, here in Chicago, typically we would have a summer break from holding our meetings just because folks usually have summer vacations.
Mhm.
Um, but we've kept those going and it's actually been really great. I look forward to, we just had our monthly meeting on Sunday. Again, that community of folks that we don't have to say a lot because we all, come into that space really for the community, which has really been great. And then, recently having our convention, I'm like coming off the convention high still of where that was really good to get to meet so many veterans from across the globe. Really. So in whatever way that you can create community, I know we have a upcoming book club across VFP that I'm really excited about. We have a truth and recruitment work group that is meeting monthly. So, ways in which to get involved in the peace movement, but not just that. There might be book clubs in your local city that you can get involved in. So again, the idea is to take care of yourself, be well, and don't go at it alone. Create community wherever you can. Get out and hike and fill those parking lots in that way as well.
Yeah.
And so just any final thoughts? I know we so good talking to you, Adrienne. I was really excited to have you come back on to really just, share some thoughts. So look, you are the president of Veterans for Peace, and I'm curious if you have some final thoughts in terms of, for our membership and those that are considering joining VFP.
Yeah.
Go.
I thank you for the invitation. I thank you for making this space and for keeping it going. Um, for these past few months, I think it's really wonderful. It's another way of us to get our word out and engage around really important issues. And I don't know, I still get back to the basics of community. I mean, Veterans for Peace, it is a community, and it's so nice to have found veterans who served in the military but kind of don't agree with the direction our country is going in, or the policies of our government, or the way our military is being used. And it is really hard to deal with those emotions when you're in the military, and people don't talk about that really openly. So you feel like you're the only one, but you're not. You're not. It's really been through Veterans for Peace that I have um, met people from all over the US and around the world, and who all believe in making the world a better place. And it's an awesome community. We definitely have our problems and we are working on them, but it's good to know you're not the only one. And Veterans for Peace, like the peace activist community, it is what I had hoped the military would be like, but wasn't. And, just that commitment to making the world a better place, a socially just and peaceful place. And those two things have to go hand in hand, social justice and peace.
I was over here nodding. That's great. Thank you so much for really landing us. I don't think anything else needs to be said other than join us. We'll be back here next Wednesday, always at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central. We have we'll continue to have this discussion around standing in the gap, using our voices in a critical moment in time where we have veterans who are asking how they can be of support locally in their communities. and where we also have active duty folks who are starting to engage, whether socially and also this space. So thank you everyone who's on here. Thank you for the comments. It's really exciting to see folks engaged every week, and to see new people coming on. Share this live, share it on your Facebook, on your YouTube, share the link, I should say, and get other folks engaged that aren't already here. So again, thank you. We have the peer support. Please reach out. And if you need any support, we will be glad to put a veteran peer with you to give you whatever it is that you might need in that moment, which might just be a phone call. So take care of one another. Take care of yourselves. Be well. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much, Adrienne.